Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Your Story, My Story. I'm your host Bree, and today I'm excited about my guest, Shirley Barkley, who is a therapist, and you're in for a treat. I'll put it like this, the subject matter is not really, I don't want to use the word sad because I really want this to be about putting out some information today, which I know is very important because it's information that I've had to use. Unfortunately, a part of my story is that of being a grieving mother. But thanks to Shirley, who is a therapist, I was able to work through it. And I'm not telling you I don't have days of sadness and all of that, but I'm able to live a productive life now. So today we'll be dealing with the 5 stages of grief, which are denial, bargaining, depression, anger, and acceptance. They don't come in any particular order. Everyone is different. I was back and forth between a few of them. But anyway, I'd like you to introduce yourself, Shirley, and tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
I'm Shirley Barkley. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been in the field for over 20-something years.
Wow.
And I wanted to be a social worker because I like helping people. I like seeing people heal and starting new and being able to be productive in their lives. I believe that, the things we go through are to make us stronger and to make us wiser. And so I think that each thing we go through and we're able to learn from it, we're better for it.
I definitely like your approach, and I am definitely one who has benefited from that. With the 5 stages of grief, denial, that was the stage that, at first hearing, I've lost family members before. I lost my best friend 10 months before I lost my son. And what I remember the first and foremost was the denial. I remember just not wanting to accept the words that I had heard. And I remember sitting down with a police officer, and he's referring to my son as the deceased. And I'm sitting there talking to him, he's taking my statement. But what I remember is I'm saying to myself, why is he referring to Demetrius as a deceased? Like, doesn't he know that's Demetrius? Because Demetrius and deceased just did not go together. Would you like to elaborate on the denial stage?
Well, during the denial stage, we're in a state of shock, and you're not one to believe it's all like a fairy tale.
Yes.
It's like unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And so it takes some time for it to really register that this is real.
Yes.
And that it's something that you're going to have to deal with. And so you want to prolong that fairy tale as long as you could, because it's not fun to deal with. It's painful, and so we want to just pretend that it's not really happening. This isn't really happening to me. It's happening to somebody else, somewhere else, but not to me. So that's why we stay in that stage for a little bit, just to kind of figure out and just let it soak in that it's real.
And you say, I was stuck in that stage, and I can tell you that one of my favorite television shows is The Twilight Zone. Mm-hmm. And I felt as if I was in an episode of The Twilight Zone. I felt I was trapped in another dimension, and I was trying to get out of it, and there was no way I could figure out, how am I going to get out of this? Because this is not real, it's not happening. And what I found was, every night when I went to bed, I thought, okay, when I get up in the morning, it'll all be a bad dream. Mm-hmm. And every morning when I woke up, it was the same thing. Okay, he's still not here. So that happened until the day of the funeral. And that's when I had to come to terms with, okay, you're going to the funeral. So he is gone. Mm-hmm. But I remember it was extremely painful. It was a very frightening thing. It was very overwhelming. And coming to terms with it, it just did not seem possible. Is there any advice that you could offer to anyone in that stage of grief?
Well, during that stage, it's important to be able to tell your story and to just get the information as to what happened. Because a lot of it, once you go through what happened, then you have no choice but to, to start believing that, yeah, this did happen. But if you don't have the information, if you just shut down there, then you stay stuck there because you don't want to believe it. So it's easier to just stay stuck and pretend.
Right. I can, I was working at a nursing home at the time, and as soon as I would get home from work, I would always look forward to taking a shower, get those scrubs off. But that day, I did not take my scrubs off. I actually slept in my scrubs. And anyone that knows me, they know that that's not me. But for some reason, I felt that if I don't take a shower, if I keep these scrubs on, if I change my routine, somehow that would bring my son back. I know that doesn't make sense, but at the time it did. I was just so desperate to know that what I was told was not true and this was a nightmare. I just needed to wake up and get out of that dream. So that stage did last for a little while, and as I said, the stages of grief do not come in any particular order, and everyone is different. I read a book by Norman Wright, and he talked about some people not wanting to deal with their grief. And he talked about he compared it to standing in front of a wave, and you refuse to let the wave knock you down, but eventually the wave will knock you down. And he described how I was feeling perfectly. The next stage, and I'm kind of going by these stages the way they affected my life. So, like I said, they don't really come in any particular order, because I know some people feel like it's all textbook, but everyone is different. Bargaining. I would have done anything, and I just felt like, God, if only you would bring him back, I'll be a better person. I won't do this and I won't do that. If only this could just be a bad dream. Would you like to elaborate on the bargaining stage?
Yes, because it's normal for you to try to justify or to try to figure out, or why did this happen? How could this have been different? You try to analyze and go through, and in our mind, we try to make some kind of reason, make it make sense.
Yes.
Even when it doesn't seem to make sense, and it's normal. And sometimes the bargaining come from when we think that, God is doing this so that we can do something else, or to get our attention. And so we go through that whole phase of bargaining with God. So sometimes we do that, or we think, okay, if I do this, then this is going to happen. So it's normal to go through that.
Yeah. That stage, it didn't take me very long to realize that, you know what, he's dead, he's gone, there's nothing that you can do. But I remember a sense of desperation of doing that bargaining process, thinking if only I could just be perfect in this area, if only I could, then God could just erase this whole episode and it will, but for me, I'm one of those people, if I read and I see it in black and white, it'll help me to process. Because at that time, you offered to, to work with me, but at the time, I just don't know. A lot of things looking back that I did not make sense, and I can see that now. But at the time, I felt I'm strong, I can do it, but I think it was the shock. Now, can you say anything about that? Like, does shock play a role in how a lot of people react and how they will respond to this?
Well, I think sometimes the shock does, but the anger, sometimes you're angry and you want to be left alone, you want to isolate. So it goes into that isolation piece, and so you're not taking the help that you could get. And one of the important things during that grief process is accepting help and asking for help, because you do need help. everybody needs help when they're going through these things.
Yes.
And so accepting the help is important, because if you don't accept positive help, you're going to react in negative ways
Yeah.
and kind of self-sabotage your grief. Because grief has a purpose, and the purpose is to heal. And if you don't process that grief healthily, if you just shut it down, it's like getting a wound and you just cover it over. And so it's going to affect the whole body. You're going to, just like your organs would shut down, your whole functioning, getting up, going to work, doing what you have to do, eating,
Yes.
sleeping, all that's going to be affected by it. So the sooner you start working on the grief, start dealing with it, the better.
Yes. I would like to talk about depression and anger. For me, I was back and forth between both of them. I feel like I was depressed and I would be angry. I would go back to those two stages. I was back and forth for a very long time. At first I did not realize I was depressed. I knew that I was angry. I was angry at my son because he was a smoker and he died from an asthma attack. I was angry at myself because I felt there were things I could have done differently or done better. I was angry at the situation. I was angry that I felt misunderstood. And then I would get depressed because I did go through the process of pushing people away or withdrawing. I was overwhelmed with my emotions at the time, and I just kept wanting to go back and erase everything that happened. So it would make me angry and depressed at the same time because I knew that
It's easy to go back to old coping ways or old ways. So the thing about depression is the anger feeds the depression. So the more angry you are and you turn it inward, it feeds the depression. So if you're going to feel, one day you're going to feel like it's anger, the other day you feel like depression. But since anger is a secondary emotion, underneath is a lot of hurt and fear and everything else. So what you're dealing with is a lot of emotion, and trying to pick it apart and work through it is important so that you wouldn't feed the depression. Because when you turn it inward, then it feeds the depression and you stay stuck in the depression, especially if you isolate. And when you're depressed, you want to isolate. You don't want to do anything, even the things that you enjoy doing, you don't want to be bothered with. It takes effort just to do the basic things to survive when you're depressed.
It's true. I went to work one day and I left, and I didn't work for almost a year. And I remember my mom, my aunt, they were all like shocked that I left my job, but I don't think a lot of people realize how depressed I was. I wasn't making the smartest decisions at the time. It's not like I had money saved up and I could afford to walk away from my job. But at the time, my thinking had just broken down. I was exhausted because I wasn't sleeping very well. I wasn't eating properly. And I just was fighting for survival. In fact, I don't even feel as if I was fighting because a part of me was giving up. There were times that I would go to bed wishing that I just wouldn't wake up because I did not want to deal with life anymore. I have 2 remaining children, and at one point I felt like, you know what, they're better off without me because I can't even function properly right now. So I'm very thankful that I had people who would check on me and I could talk to them and all of that, but I wasn't very honest about how hurt I was and what I was dealing with. And what complicated things for me was grief within itself is difficult enough. But when, and I know people sometimes, they mean well, but when they offer their advice, you know, if you're looking sad and they're basically telling you to get over it and move on, it's a very hurtful thing. How would you advise someone who's in the grieving process to deal with people who are well-intentioned, but they're really hurting them with the things that they're saying?
Well, you're always going to have somebody like that who they don't know what to say in those times, so they say the wrong things. rather than, most times it's better not to say anything than to
Yes.
say things that, would hurt instead of help that person heal. So in those situations, you need to not take it personal, not just understand that they don't understand. Everybody doesn't understand what you're going through. They might say they do, but it's not realistic for other people to understand, especially if they haven't been through a similar experience. So you just take the encouragement, the positive things from the encouragement that other people give, because whenever there's advice, you're going to have some that's helpful and some that's not. So you take that that's helpful, repeat that, and keep that going in your life. And that's not helpful, you just ignore it and just move on. And just let yourself know that that person doesn't understand and they're trying to be helpful, but it's not.
Yes.
So you just identify it and move from there.
When I was in that, I was all over the place with my emotions. And when I was receiving advice from people, it was very hurtful. And I remember I got to a place where I just held everything inside. I was not expressing, anything. So a lot of people didn't realize how much I was hurting and how depressed I was. But what happened to me eventually, and you can tell me this is normal, was I started to feel very sick. Physically, I started to feel a lot of pain. I started to feel a heaviness over my chest. It felt like an elephant was standing on top of my chest at times, and I felt as if my grief was killing me. Is this a normal response?
Yes, we have a strong mind-body connection. And even though people want to separate mental health and physical health and social health, it's all connected.
Yes.
And so if you don't take care of your mental health, it will affect your physical body. If you don't take care of your physical body, it affects your mental health just the same. So it's all connected. And when you kept everything in, it's just like with the wound, it's going to shut down your body, the different organs. But with this, it feels like an emotional shutting down.
Yes.
And so you're just going through the motions. You're just in survival mode. You're numb. Your emotions are numb, and you're just going through the motions. So you're not really living. You're just in survival mode.
Yes.
And it's just not a way to. It's like an existence.
Yes.
Like in a little prison.
Yeah.
So
you
it's
described
not.
it perfectly.
It's not a way to be. It's not a healthy living environment.
No,
at
you
all.
described it perfectly because, I live in a 4-bedroom home, and I can tell you that I spent the majority of my time for almost a year in my bedroom. I would eat in there, I'd watch TV in there, read in there. It was like a prison, but it felt like it was my safe place. It felt like it was the only place where I could cry, and without anyone there to criticize me or to tell me what to do. But eventually it got to a place where I did not know how to function outside of the room because it was like, okay, go in the room, cry, do whatever it is you want to do. And I did eventually lose touch with reality. I can look back and admit that to myself now. I went on a cruise for the first time, and I struggled to have a good time. Every time I felt myself having fun, I felt so guilty. I would say to myself, you're here. Why are you here having fun? You should be crying over your son. That's what I kept saying to myself. My friends, are you okay? And they really went out of their way. They knew that I was struggling, and I will always be grateful to them for that. But is that a normal response?
Yes. Without intervention, you're going to be stuck. And that's what was happening to you. You thought you were supposed to, you didn't know what you're supposed to do, so you're trying to make up what you're supposed to do. And because you felt you weren't doing what you're supposed to do, then you were not being a good mom because you're not just sitting and crying for your son. And that's far from it. He wouldn't want you to be sitting and crying over him. The thing is that life happens and we have to grieve, heal, so we can move on. And when you don't know what is healthy, then you pick something and you kind of make it what you think it should be.
Yes.
And that's when you know you need professional help, because people are going to say all kinds of things, but if you have a professional, hopefully they'll help you steer you in the right direction, and so you wouldn't feel stuck and just like you don't know what to do.
Yes. Yes, my biggest regret was that I did not seek professional help from the very beginning. You know, I have a friend that's a grief counselor, but I spoke to her on the phone a few times and I really thought, okay, I'm fine. But deep down, I remember she said to me, and she was so right, you're yearning for your son. And it was just that deep disappointment of knowing that he's gone. And, you know, I'm still in the home where he passed away. So there's that constant reminder. And I just remember feeling so lost because, you know, he passed away at the age of 26, and I had him when I was 26. And I remember I kept thinking, this is just not happening. I'm in a world where my son, he's no longer here on this earth. And it was a very hard thing to come to terms with. And I remember I had gotten to a point where, because the financial issues were crashing in on me, you know, not getting along with others, because, I mean, to be honest with you, I felt so misunderstood, but I was just not in a good place emotionally. And I remember reaching out to you one day, telling you that I can't do this anymore. And I'm so thankful for that, because that's when the situation turned around. I would like you to talk about the therapy that you went through with me, because I will tell anyone that saved my life. In all honesty, I never thought I'd be able to think clearly again, be functional again, go back out into the workforce. I had pretty much given up on myself, and when you talked to me about the therapy, I was a little afraid, and I remember it was a very painful process. But at the same time, as painful as it was also very helpful. Would you like to elaborate?
Sure. Well, knowing that you're a great writer and you're very expressive in your writing, I chose the journaling therapy for you, because I figured, especially you have the time and getting it out on paper, because you were spending a lot of time in your head.
Yes.
A lot of time analyzing, a lot of time telling yourself lies.
Yes.
So that was feeding the depression.
Yes.
And so getting it on paper so that we can process it and then clarify and help you to see the truth about what's reality and what wasn't, and what you had some control over and what you didn't. And just helping you to sort through it on paper was much more helpful than doing it in your head.
Yes.
And so we went through that process of just piece by piece putting it together, from your trauma story to looking at just the process of grieving and admitting the hurt and pain that you were feeling, and then, you know, just talking to God about it, and then moving it to the next level where you can look at, what do I do now? So it's like bringing you through that whole grief journey so that you could then be ready to go out and start new.
Yes.
After you've come to the last phase of the acceptance, because the depression is the normal part of the grief.
Yes.
And so you'll go through that, but then to come out on the other side, it's like going through a tunnel and then seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and then you come out and say, okay, I can do this, I can start over, I can live again. And that's kind of the process that we went through with your grief.
I can tell you that it's one of the most difficult things I've ever done. I wanted to heal so badly, I cooperated, and I didn't question the process. It was very difficult writing some of the things I did, and I remember when you would have me reading things to you, there were times I would break down and we would work through it. And a lot of what I was experiencing was guilt, because I kept thinking back to the arguments I had with my son, the times when I felt that I could have been a little kinder, I could have been a little nicer, I could have done things differently. I thought back to the times when he really hurt my feelings and all the unresolved things. And that was very difficult. And after you had me, I remember I wrote a letter. And I can tell you it changed my life, because it helped me to realize that a lot of, like what you said, there were lies I was telling myself. There was a lot of things in my head that I was telling myself, and they held me captive for a long time. And it was a very painful experience, but the journaling and being able to express myself that way, it really helped me to come to terms. In fact, for the longest, I said that my son had passed away, because for some reason, passed away sounded so much better than dead, you know? I did not want to say the words that Demetrius was dead, because it made it too real. I miss my son every day. I still feel sad, and I cry. Even last night, I will admit, I cry, but I've noticed it's not like I'm crying all day long. I'm able to self-talk, as you taught me, and I'm able to work my way through it. I always ask God for comfort, peace, and strength to help me work through the process. And there are scriptures that definitely help me. And I would like to say to anyone out there who is grieving right now, it doesn't even have to be the loss of a child. It can be the loss of anyone in your life that you have lost. Seek professional help. That is so important. Don't use this as a time to pull away from everyone. Take the time to grieve. Take the time to heal. Do not allow anyone to tell you how to go through the process, because it is, after all, your process. You're the one that's going through the pain. But I can tell you right now, it's a tough process no matter what you do, but you can make it a lot easier on yourself. What I have chosen to do with my pain and my grief, I said to myself, I don't want this all to be in vain. So my goal is to reach out to others and help others who are in grief, and let them know there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that you do not have to give up on yourself. I'm just so thankful for the help that you gave me, because I have a new lease on life, and I embrace life now, and there are so many things. I have a bucket list of things that I want to do. I've allowed fear in my life to hold me back. And something that I found after my son died was I became very fearful. Is that a normal response, a normal reaction to a death?
Yes, and especially with your situation and being here, and the other thing too is the anxiety had been a kind of part of your life before, so that our coping, whatever we use to cope, we usually tend to react back in those same ways when we're under pressure, and under these situations. So that is a part of it, and under the anger is always that fear and hurt. So you had the hurt and you had the fear. Those were feeding the anger, which were feeding the depression. So it's all connected. So that's why we want healthy coping skills, healthy coping mechanisms to replace those, because if you don't have that and you're not going deep to your core value, you're going to react with anxiety, with fear, with depression, with all those things which are normal, but it's a process of getting back to the more healthy ones. So you want to go the healthy route. It's normal to go the unhealthy if you don't know any better, but once you learn differently, then you want to go the healthy route.
Now I looked up like help groups online. I was trying to find other parents who were going through it, because I couldn't. Now there were a couple people who reached out to me who had lost children, and the help they gave me was amazing, because it really took me through a difficult time. I have one friend who had lost her child when he was a baby, and she sent me a message, and it stays with me. She said, you got to see your son grow up. You got to know him as a young man and know his personality and all that. that made me very grateful. I'm like, you know what? I lost my son at the age of 26, but thank God for those 26 years, because I thought back to, he was born by a C-section. The Lord could have taken him on that day. So I had to look at it from the standpoint, you know what, God gave me 26 years. So it helped me to appreciate those 26 years. And then there were other people who shared their experience of loss. One friend who had lost his mother, and he shared his story with me, and it was very helpful, because I know when people share their stories, sometimes it's painful, but they see that you need the help, to know that there's help, you know, there's the light at the end of the tunnel. So, you know, the groups that I found online, and I'm not trying to criticize anyone, but what I found with these groups was that I felt if I would have stayed in those groups, that I would have been stuck, like there was no way out. Because, you know, when I read the stories of people, they didn't want to leave. Like, I was stuck in my room, not working anymore, as I was not working. People talking about not showering, not washing their hair, not doing anything at all. And I realized these people are in complicated grief. Would you like to talk about complicated grief?
Yes. If you get stuck in any of the processes, then it complicates it. I've had clients who, they come in like 20 years later, and they'll tell you about what happened to their sister or their brother, or when they're still thinking it's their fault. This is like 20 years later. And when they're telling it to you, it seems like it's just happened yesterday. It's like you can't believe that this was like 20 years ago. And so it is complicated grief at that time, and most times they finally come in because they're not able to function. It has shut down their life, and whatever is going on in their life at the time, everything is just out of control, and so they finally decide that they have to get help, because it slowly leaks. It doesn't seem at first like it's impacting the life, but then it's just slowly seeps through and unfolds, and you realize that I got to do something.
Right.
And that's when they come in, because it's just like a wound, like we talked about. It becomes complicated if you just shut it down. Now you're infected. Now you have to go to the hospital. Now so that's complicated grief. It's when it's to the point where it's impacting your daily functioning.
I can tell you that going through therapy was the best thing I could have ever done for myself, and I'll be eternally grateful for you and the process. I'm not 100% where I want to be, but I'm definitely on a much better track than where I was this time last year. Next month will be 2 years since my son has passed away. I can't believe it's been, 2 years have gone by that quickly, but I've learned to appreciate the small things. And when I get depressed, I think back to the last conversation that I had with my son the day before he died. I didn't realize that would have been our last conversation. But I look at it as a gift. God gave me the opportunity to have that conversation, and the last interaction I had with my son was a smile. He smiled at me when I was leaving. So I think of I couldn't ask for more. I've learned to look back on the 2 weeks before he passed, and I was very angry with him and his sister. And I remember telling him, look, we need to talk. We had a conversation for over 2 hours. And that day he told me the things that he was upset with me about. I pretty much told him what I was upset about. And he hugged me after that conversation. That was a gift. Because I didn't realize God gave us that opportunity to clear the air on a lot of things. So I've learned not to look at the negative. I can focus on the positive things. And when others share with me, like some of his high school friends came by last week to see me, and they miss him, and I was very grateful for that, because they were very close. And it was just nice to know that they still love him, and that they still have love for me as his mother. And you know, because, and it was so weird because the day before I was thinking, here it is, his birthday was coming up, and no one really wants to talk about him anymore. It's like he never existed. But I realized that was depression telling me that. You know, I look back and I can see that now. But I remember talking to you about it, and you said that's where I need to have a plan for those special, like the birthdays and the anniversary of his passing and things like that. So I'm better equipped to deal with, because when the low points are coming, I understand it better now. And I can anticipate and plan ahead of time. But I know that when I have the low moments, it's not a weakness on my part. I'm just a person that's grieving the loss of my son. Once again, Sister Shirley, I cannot thank you enough for what you did for me in this grieving process. And I've always heard Oprah talking about paying it forward. And it is my goal and intention to pay it forward and to help others like myself. You know, I want all the grieving parents, siblings, grandparents to know that there is hope. And it's okay to move forward with your life. It's okay to laugh and have fun. Your loved one would not want you to sit home in a dark room, sad and depressed for the rest of your life. If I have not learned anything else from my son's passing, I've learned this much. Life is a gift. When we wake up every morning, it is a gift to take a breath. My son died from an asthma attack. So breath means even more to me now. Every time I take a breath, I thank God for that breath. When I am down and out, you know, a friend of mine sent me a sermon the other day, and he talked about Paul. And with Paul's, the scripture where he says, I've learned to be content in all things. And I realize if I can take that attitude, to be content in all things, things may not always go my way, but there is a blessing in every situation. In my son's death, I saw the blessings. He didn't have insurance, and my family, they paid for his funeral. That was a blessing. And these are the things that I had to look at and say, you know what? My son did not die because God did not love him and God didn't love me, you know? And even with all of that, I still felt God's blessings. So this episode was very personal for me, but I just wanted to know that I can share my story and give others hope and, you know, encouragement. And I'm asking you, if you are at that point of complicated grief, reach out to a professional, reach out to your pastor, but reach out to someone. When we're down and out, we're not honoring our loved one's memory. We can find positive things to do to honor their memory. Was there something that your loved one liked to do? Then maybe you can continue that dream for them. No, you know, I've told myself I'll live for me and my son. Realistically, I can't live for both of us. But I want to enjoy life more, because I tell myself all the time, when I see him in heaven, I want to tell him, Demetrius, this is what I did, and this is what I did, and I did all these things because I learned a lot of lessons after you passed away. So life is a gift. Let's not throw it away. Let's live life to the fullest. Once again, Shirley, I'd like to thank you for being a guest, and she will be the guest on the next show where we'll be talking about her story. Thank you for watching, and I hope, as I said before, the goal of this show is to educate, uplift, and inspire, and I hope that we did all three today. Thank you.